Erin Monroe hadn't breathed this kind of air in years. Crisp, pine-scented, clean. It filled his lungs like medicine, a stark contrast to the recycled, lifeless atmosphere of high-rise offices and airports. The moment he turned off the paved highway onto the long, winding dirt road that led to Monroe Ranch, a strange silence took over, the kind that didn't suffocate, but instead welcomed. It wrapped around him like an old coat, familiar and broken in, bearing the scent of hay, rain, and memory. The city felt like a bad dream now, brief, chaotic, and unworthy of lingering on. His boots hit the gravel just as the late afternoon sun dipped low behind the evergreens, casting long golden shadows across the hills and that glass-still lake that had once been his entire childhood universe. He had inherited this land, a full 200 acres of open freedom, after his grandfather passed away 7 years ago, but corporate life had consumed him. After graduation, he'd buried himself in finance, launched a tech startup, scaled fast, and then merged into something bigger and colder. Now, 33, and wealthy on paper, Aaron had begun to realize that his heart was bankrupt in all the ways that actually mattered. It wasn't burnout, it was a hunger, a spiritual thirst to reconnect with something real. So for the first time in nearly 2 years, he had returned to the lake his grandfather had dug by hand with a rented excavator and dreams too big for suburbia. The lake was still there, untouched in its beauty, surrounded by a whispering forest and a sense of timelessness. A wooden arch, weather-worn but sturdy, still proudly declared, Monroe Ranch, Este 1958. Aaron parked his truck beside the trailhead, hauled out his canvas tent, a cooler filled with steaks, a portable fire pit, and his loyal golden retriever Duke, who barked with joy at the familiar scents. Together they made camp beside the lake's edge, the water gently lapping like it was saying welcome home. As the fire cracked and shadows danced, Aaron sat back with a tin cup of bourbon, Duke's head resting on his thigh, and watched the stars emerge like ancient constellations waking from slumber. He felt more human in those few hours than he had in months. But peace, he would soon learn, had a fragile heartbeat. It shattered before sunrise. The flashing of red and blue lights against the water tore through the stillness like a siren in a cathedral. Aaron jolted awake to the sound of tires crunching gravel and doors slamming. Duke growled low. 2 police SUVs pulled up along the dirt path that led to the lake, their lights rotating in angry silence. One officer emerged quickly, a younger man, sharp eyes scanning the camp. His hand hovered near his holster. Aaron stood slowly, hands visible. "Morning," Aaron said cautiously. The officer responded without warmth. "Sir, we've received multiple complaints about a man trespassing and illegally camping on HOA lake property. We need to see ID." Aaron blinked. "HOA property? This is Monroe Ranch. This is my land." The officer's eyes narrowed slightly but held steady. "We need to verify that. Identification, please." Aaron pulled out his wallet and handed over his driver's license. "Aaron Monroe. This is my grandfather's land. I inherited it. Been in our family since the 50s. The officer took the ID and turned toward the vehicle to run it. Meanwhile, more headlights pierced the growing dawn. 3 additional squad cars pulled in. Too many, Aaron thought. This wasn't about a noise complaint. Something else was going on. And then she arrived. From a shiny silver SUV stepped a woman in a fitted blazer and heels, far too clean for gravel paths. She was around 50, meticulously groomed, with an air of entitlement that filled the space like cheap perfume. She stormed toward Aaron, chin high and voice already raised. "That's him," she shouted. "He was here last night, camping, on our lake." Aaron stared. "I'm sorry? Your lake?" She crossed her arms. "I'm Deborah Klein, president of the Willowbrook Lakes HOA. We have rules. This is private property. You were warned before." Aaron frowned, genuinely confused. "I've never seen you in my life." "Warned about what?" Before she could respond, the officer returned with a noticeable shift in demeanor. He handed back Aaron's license, face now a touch more neutral, perhaps even respectful. "Mr. Moreau," he said, "I've confirmed. This land, including the lake, is listed under the Monroe family estate. You're not trespassing." Deborah's expression soured. "That can't be. The lake's part of our community trails. It's been that way for years." Aaron's eyebrows rose slowly. "You've always used it?" His tone turned sharp. "Used my land?" There was a long, silent pause. The air felt heavier now, charged with something unspoken. Aaron stared at the lake, then back at Deborah, and something inside him clicked into place. The unease, the extra squad cars, her confidence. She truly believed this was her lake, but it wasn't. It never had been. He had the papers, the deeds, the survey maps. Something was wrong, very wrong. The officers apologized and began to leave, their job clearly done. Deborah hesitated, then stormed off without another word. Aaron didn't move. He just stood there, eyes locked on the placid lake, suddenly aware that beneath its tranquil surface might lie years of lies. He didn't leave the ranch that day. He stayed and stared, walked the line, pulled out the old signs that marked his property boundaries, faded but still standing. He found one bent under a rotting log, Private Property Monroe, Ranch. Another had been nailed over with an HOA park sign, now chipped and barely legible. A third was gone entirely. That night, he lit another fire, sat beside Duke, and scrolled through emails he hadn't opened in months. A few notifications from the county, a permit filed by the HOA for beautification of trail systems, a note about easement hearings. It all seemed minor at the time. He had never connected the dots. Now he couldn't not connect them. The next morning, Aaron drove into town and visited the county assessor's office. He asked to see the plat maps. The clerk, a gray-haired man with the slow patience of someone who'd seen every land dispute possible, pulled up the digital files and printed them. Aaron traced his finger along the boundary lines. There it was, clear as day. The lake was inside his property. So were the trails, the picnic area, even the dock. All of it. Yet another map, requested from a subdivision zoning file, labeled the same lake as Willow Lake, community access. He frowned. What does it mean when one property appears on two different maps with different designations? Aaron asked the clerk. The man scratched his beard. Could be a clerical error. Could be someone filed an incorrect easement. Could be the HOA's been using it unofficially and got bold enough to rename it. Is that legal? Hell no. But happens more than you'd think. People don't challenge it if they don't know. Aaron's thoughts spun. Had they known he was gone? Had they counted on it? Had this been slow, quiet encroachment, one bench, one trail, one picnic table at a time, until everyone simply believed the lie? He drove back to the ranch in a daze. His land wasn't just stolen. It had been rebranded. Google Maps called it Willow Lake. The HOA had set up a geotag. Residents posted selfies there, tagged with names that didn't belong. One post even said, "So grateful our HOA maintains this gorgeous lake." Aaron's hand clenched. Not out of rage, but resolve. He wasn't going anywhere. That evening, he started gathering materials. Old deed copies. Photographs of him and his grandfather fishing off the wooden pier. Drone shots from earlier years showing the absence of trails and benches. He documented everything. Took photos of current encroachments. Measured distances. Plotted GPS coordinates. He pitched a bigger tent, installed motion sensors, bought trail cameras, installed fresh no trespassing signs on every boundary line. And at the main trailhead, where the HOA posted their Willow Lake guidelines, he nailed up a fresh wooden sign. Welcome to Monroe Lake, private property, entry by written permission only. He knew it wouldn't sit well, but he wasn't here to be liked. He was here to take back what was his. Aaron Monroe stood before the shattered wood of his ranch gate. The remnants of the Monroe Ranch welcome sign splintered across the gravel like bones. The air was still, eerily calm, but beneath that quiet was a storm brewing inside him, thick, electric, and irreversible. The sign they'd nailed in its place read, "Trespassers will be prosecuted. Willowbrook Lakes, H.O." He wasn't just angry. He was insulted, betrayed. This was his family's land, his legacy, and now these strangers had not only trespassed, but claimed it, claimed him as the intruder. That morning, as the sun rose behind the shattered wood, Aaron knew the line had been crossed. There was no turning back. What had begun as a peaceful return to his roots was now a war for truth, justice, and the soul of the land his grandfather had bled to protect. Jamie arrived 20 minutes later, her hybrid Prius spitting dust as it pulled up. She stepped out in jeans and a leather jacket, her face already dark with fury when she saw the wreckage. "They did this overnight?" she asked. Aaron nodded, handing her the photo he'd taken as evidence. "I've already emailed it to the county and to your office. I want to file everything: trespassing, vandalism, misrepresentation, property damage, malicious prosecution, all of it." Jamie crouched to examine the new sign. "They're escalating because they're nervous. They wouldn't be pulling stunts like this if they thought they had solid legal ground. But it also means we need to move fast. This isn't just civil anymore. They're trying to build a case to discredit you. Aaron looked out across the field, past the lake glittering like glass in the morning light, and toward the clustered rooftops of Willowbrook Lakes, each one now tainted in his mind as part of a quiet conspiracy. Then, we hit them harder. By noon, Jamie was on a Zoom call with a title specialist, a county zoning clerk, and an assistant district attorney. The more she laid out the evidence, the clearer the picture became. Somewhere around 2009, a land reclassification request was filed by someone within the Willowbrook Development Project, shifting usage designations on the adjacent Monroe land. But it wasn't a full transfer. No sale, no easement agreement, no notarized handover. It was a silent annexation, an illegal attempt to convert usage rights through neighborhood assumption. The mistake might have gone unnoticed if Aaron hadn't returned, but now it was a paper trail unraveling. They printed satellite imagery from 2006 and compared it with 2023. Trails had expanded year by year, with each season revealing new benches, new docks, new recreational spaces, all built quietly, all under the radar. Death by 1,000 picnic tables, Jamie muttered. I've seen this before in rural counties. Developers build subdivisions next to legacy land, and over time, the lines blur. Nobody checks the paperwork until someone like you shows up with the original deed. Aaron, meanwhile, spent the afternoon flying his drone over every inch of the lake, collecting high-resolution footage of unauthorized structures. He counted 5 docks, 2 of them fully equipped with furniture, lights, even Wi-Fi routers powered by extension cords run from nearby homes. He zoomed in on one resident sunbathing, a cooler beside her, unaware she was lounging on someone else's land. At the far end of the lake, a gazebo had been constructed, complete with a plaque, donated by Willowbrook Lakes HOA for community enjoyment. Aaron laughed bitterly. They weren't just trespassing, they were proudly funding the theft. But the worst part came that evening, when Aaron and Jamie returned to town hall to request copies of the original development permits. The clerk, a younger woman with a cautious demeanor, handed them a thick folder. Inside were HOA meeting minutes, scanned memos, and annotated blueprints from the early 2010s. As Jamie sifted through them, she froze. This is it. She held up a grainy scanned memo, signed by the former HOA president, Deborah's late husband. It read, "Proceed with trail extensions through northern parcel. Monroe Ranch sign has been suggest reclassification to public access in next county zoning review." Aaron stared at it, pulse thudding in his ears. He knew. He didn't make a mistake. He planned it. Jamie nodded grimly. And Deborah inherited the throne? She's continued it for years. That memo was damning. It shifted the entire narrative from oops to orchestrated. Back at the ranch that night, Aaron could barely sleep. Every creak of a branch, every rustle in the woods, felt like a trespass. He had installed motion lights, and one of them flickered near the trailhead around midnight. He stepped outside, flashlight in hand, and found fresh footprints near the newly posted no trespassing sign. Someone had been there, again, likely to check if their bold claim had been removed, but the sign still stood. And now, Aaron mounted a camera directly above it. The next day, Jamie filed a cease and desist letter and notified the HOA of impending legal action. It was served to Deborah's home directly. Aaron imagined her reaction, probably fury, probably disbelief. She had likely grown used to no resistance, the way a bully becomes confident in silence. But Aaron's return had broken that silence. Jamie also submitted a formal notice to the county to reevaluate zoning status for the disputed parcel, with the original deed, survey maps, and photographic evidence. The request held real weight. A hearing date was set, 3 weeks away. But it wasn't quiet while they waited. Signs around the lake were defaced. One had "Liar" spray painted across it. Another was torn down completely. Trash was dumped at Harron's gate. One night, someone let their dog loose near his campsite, where Duke nearly got into a fight. "They're trying to make you feel unsafe," Jamie warned. Classic escalation tactic. You need to get cameras on every corner. So Aaron invested in a full security system, including motion sensors, trail cams with night vision, and floodlights. He wasn't going to be bullied off land his family had kept for 70 years. Then, the media caught wind. It started with a small-town blog. Man returns to family ranch, discovers HOA has been using his land for years. A few residents commented in support, admitting they'd wondered for years about the lake's ownership. But the HOA fired back with a public statement claiming Aaron had interrupted years of peaceful community access and was aggressively asserting rights that had long been redefined through mutual use. Jamie called it word salad, but the statement circulated fast. Local news showed up next, filming Aaron from the gate with the lake glimmering behind him. He told his story calmly about his grandfather, about the property, about the signs that disappeared, about the surprise police visit, and about the resolve he now had to restore the truth. That interview did something unexpected. It created a split in the neighborhood. Some Willowbrook residents began reaching out privately. One woman, a nurse named Carla, confessed she'd always wondered about the ownership but felt scared to question the HOA. Another family offered to remove their dock voluntarily and even signed a statement saying they'd believed they were allowed only because of HOA assurances. The narrative began to shift. Aaron wasn't a villain, he was a wronged heir, and the community had been misled. But not everyone flipped sides. 2 nights later, someone fired a BB gun at one of Aaron's cameras, shattering the lens. Another time, he found tire tracks in the soft mud beside his truck. Someone had driven close, too close, a silent warning. But Aaron didn't flinch. Instead, he took Duke to the far side of the lake, set up a new tent and began marking survey flags in the ground, red tape flapping in the wind, clearly outlining what belonged to him. One morning, he found that someone had kicked the flags down and stuffed them in a trash bag. He simply put them back up. The night before the county hearing, Aaron stood on the edge of the lake in the dark, wind moving softly through the trees. He could see porch lights flickering from the subdivision, people going about their lives. Maybe some were innocent, maybe some didn't know, but others had. Others had watched signs disappear, watched structures go up, and said nothing. That silence had enabled a theft of place, of history, of memory. Not anymore, he whispered. The day the hearing arrived with overcast skies and a storm brewing in more ways than one. Jamie wore a navy suit, Aaron a dark button-down. They entered the county building together, armed with documentation, witnesses, and confidence. Deborah arrived 30 minutes later, flanked by 2 HOA board members and a smug-looking attorney in a tailored gray suit. He was the kind of lawyer who thrived in ambiguity, but Jamie came on with clarity. Inside the hearing room, a panel of 3 zoning officers listened intently as Jamie laid out the case. Deed maps, memo evidence, footage, witness statements, the authorized signs, the docs, the memo from 2009, everything. Deborah's lawyer tried to argue implied easement through adverse community use, but Jamie shredded the logic. Adverse use cannot be claimed by the aggressor who initiated the theft, she said. You don't get to claim ownership just because you've stolen long enough without being caught. Deborah looked livid. When she finally spoke, her voice was brittle. We've maintained and beautified that lake for over a decade. It's part of our neighborhood identity. Aaron stood. It was never yours to beautify, he said. You paved over my family's legacy like it was a blank canvas for your homeowners association. You didn't preserve anything. You erased it. Silence hung in the room like a thick curtain. Then the lead zoning officer leaned forward and spoke the words Aaron had been hoping to hear for weeks. Based on the evidence provided, the disputed parcel, including the lake and surrounding acreage, is affirmed as part of the Monroe Ranch property. Any further use without written permission constitutes trespassing under county law. Jamie grinned. Deborah's face drained of color. As they left the building, cameras from local news were waiting. Aaron gave a brief statement, simple and firm. You can't steal land with silence. You can't erase history by pretending it never existed. The story aired that night, and within days the signs came down, docks were dismantled, trails fenced off. The lake was renamed on Google Maps after Aaron submitted the updated ownership information with verified GIS data. It now read, Monroe Lake, private land. But Aaron knew this wasn't the end. Deborah had influence. There were whispers of countersuits, of appeals. The HOA wasn't finished, and neither was he. But for now, for the first time in years, Aaron stood on the dock his grandfather had built and watched the sunset paint the lake in amber fire. Duke lay beside him, tail gently wagging. The trees whispered again, not in warning, but in welcome. The land was his. The story was being rewritten, and the battle had only just begun. The dust had barely settled on the courthouse steps when the true fallout began. Not loud or violent, but quiet, bureaucratic, and sharp, like paper cuts that bled long after they landed. The injunction Jamie filed held firm. The court recognized Monroe Lake and its surrounding acres as private, inalienably tied to Aaron's inherited deed. And that single decision struck like a bell across every suburban porch in Willowbrook Lakes. It wasn't just a ruling, it was a reckoning. Deborah's resignation came in the early hours of a Thursday morning, a quiet, cowardly move buried in an emailed HOA bulletin masked as a personal decision for health reasons. But the people knew. They always knew deep down something had been off. The tension at the emergency HOA meeting could have been sliced with a dull spoon. One man stood, gripping a yellowed property map he found in his garage. Another shouted, red-faced, you mean my dues went to pay for someone else's land? My daughter's swing set is on his property? It was chaos. Aaron didn't attend. His silence had already said everything. Instead, he was back at the lake, rebuilding the original Monroe dock with sanded cedar and long, slow strokes of varnish, the same way his grandfather had done. He didn't do it for show. He did it because healing wasn't something you demanded from others. It was something you offered to the land that had waited patiently for your return. The local news story continued to climb in traction, breaking into regional headlines and cable news segments. Ranch owner reclaims stolen legacy. Men accused of trespassing on his own land exposes HOA fraud. One station flew a drone over the lake, capturing early morning mist curling off the water like breath from a sleeping giant, finally stirred. Social media picked up the narrative, and suddenly Aaron was fielding messages from strangers. Some sharing similar HOA horror stories, others simply thanking him for standing his ground. One message, from a 67-year-old man in Montana, read, "They paved over my grandfather's orchard in '92. I didn't have your strength. I'm proud of you, son." It wasn't praise Aaron sought, but the solidarity moved him. He hadn't realized how many people had been quietly robbed by the same kind of smiling theft, the kind dressed in board meetings and community guidelines that cared more about curb appeal than ancestral soil. And as the story caught fire, so did the interest of legal watchdogs and land rights advocates. Jamie was approached by a nonprofit land stewardship organization offering assistance in reestablishing Monroe Lake as a protected historical site. Aaron agreed, not out of spite, but out of duty. The more they could shield the land from future encroachment, the more they could protect others from the same erosion of dignity and memory. But not everyone surrendered gracefully. A few HOA hardliners pushed back, filing an appeal. Their attorney argued the Monroe family abandoned the property and that communal use created implied rights. But Aaron's lawyer responded with documented proof of taxes paid, satellite footage over 20 years, and most damning of all, those internal HOA emails. The court rejected the appeal within a week. Another blow landed when a state agency began investigating HOA funds misused for development on land that never belonged to them. Deborah's name was on nearly every check. The investigation didn't just expose civil misconduct, it hinted at criminal negligence. As subpoenas rolled in, a silence fell over Willowbrook Lakes. Lawn signs disappeared, trails were dismantled. Even the gazebo that once stood like a trophy near the northern bend of the lake was taken down, its screws left gleaming like exposed bones in the grass. One by one, residents began taking accountability, not because they were forced, but because the mirror Aaron held up made them see who they had become. Carla, the nurse, was the first to reach out sincerely. She showed up with lemonade and an apology. Then a young couple brought homemade bread and offered to help clean debris near the East Trail. It wasn't about fixing everything overnight. It was about showing that some hearts hadn't been lost, just misled. Aaron, though, never let his guard down. He installed new security posts, not out of fear, but resolve. He hired a local boy to help monitor the land and catalog every change, every fence post, every suspicious footprint. And then he did something unexpected. He invited a few of the respectful residents for a small gathering by the lake, just 10 people, all of whom had come forward with remorse or curiosity. No medium, no performance, just a fire pit, hot coffee, and stories. That night, he stood with Duke at his feet and said, "My grandfather built this dock with his bare hands. He taught me to fish here. He taught me silence isn't weakness, it's patience." But when silence is taken for consent, that's when you speak. The group listened quietly, flames flickering against their faces, and something changed in the air. For the first time, Aaron felt the lake wasn't just his by law, it was his again by spirit. And these neighbors were learning to ask, not take. Weeks passed. Spring softened the air. Wildflowers bloomed along the lake's edge where old footpaths had once cut too deep. Birds returned in the mornings. Deer grazed by the creek. The land, once tense with conflict, breathed again. Monroe Lake was now listed on county maps as private property, with its original boundary restored. Jamie helped file a conservation status that would protect it for generations, and Harron made a promise to himself he would never leave this land unguarded again. One afternoon, a schoolteacher from the edge of town reached out. She asked if her students could do a history project on Monroe Ranch. Record interviews, gather old photographs, maybe plant a native species garden as a tribute. Aaron agreed, but under one condition. The kids would first hear the full story. Not just about the theft, but about resilience, roots, and respect. He wanted them to understand that land is more than property. It is memory. It is story. It is blood buried under oak trees and sweat pressed into soil. By summer, the transformation was undeniable. What was once contested became a stranger, and the man who returned a stranger now stood as guardian, not out of vengeance, but love. The final blow to the HOA came quietly. After the fines, resignations, and lawsuits, the board dissolved. A new charter was written with stricter boundaries and legal oversight. Some moved away. Others stayed and helped rebuild trust, not just with Harron, but with each other. And though the past could never be undone, it could be honored. Aaron reopened the old barn, restored it, and turned it into a heritage center. Not grand, but real. Inside were maps, tools, and letters from his grandfather. On the wall hung a sign burned into cedar, Monroe Lake, let the land speak. People came to visit, not many, but enough to listen. And so the lake remained still. The wind carried no more warnings. The trees whispered again, but only stories. And Aaron, seated on his rebuilt dock, dew curled beside him, cast his line into water that shimmered like memory itself, unbroken, unowned by false hands, and finally at peace.